Pauken. You opened up talking about the dental situation, and I give you a little example of something I dealt with when I was chairman of the Texas Workforce Commission. I've been out of government in the private sector since leaving the Reagan administration. I was elected state chairman of the Republican Party in the mid-90s, and we built it from the grassroots up to the majority party. But I got down to Austin, and there was a marvelous program at the University of Texas teaching Western civilization. Rob Coons, who's a philosophy professor there, he got tenure, and actually it was a conservative, but it wasn't a political program, it just taught Western civilization. I have a book I wrote called Bringing America Home, and I described how about 25 years ago, Stanford had a marvelous Western civilization program, and Jesse Jackson led a group of demonstrators out there, and the chant was, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has to go." And unfortunately, he was successful, but you wouldn't think it would happen in Texas, but at the University of Texas, marvelous program, Western civilization, extremely popular, written up even in the New York Times in a favorable context, but the radicals of the 60s who had so much influence, even in Texas and even at the University of Texas, determined that they wanted to kill the program. They were successful in killing it. And so you've got to pay attention to content. Now, the good news out of that story is I put Rob Coons in touch with Kent Hance, who's chancellor at Texas Tech, and Kent, on his own, established a Western civilization program at Texas Tech. Some of the liberal faculty didn't like it, but it's a marvelous program. But the battle for ideas, the battle for the culture is so critical, and we ignore it at our peril. You know, one of my favorite cartoon strips is Peanuts, the late Charles Schulz, and the one I love every fall to read or to see is Charlie Brown running up to kick the football, and Lucy's holding the football for Charlie Brown. And he runs up to kick it, and every year she pulls it out from under him, and he falls on his keister, and it's going to be different next year. And I would suggest to you in the post-Reagan period of American politics on the Republican side, this is what has happened to us. A lot of people who are career politicians will say the right things, the rhetoric is great, but the reality is it's all too often business as usual. And as I have been in the fight for conservative principles for a long time, and I wouldn't be involved in this if I were not more worried about the future of our country than I've ever been in my lifetime, and I've had a very good run. We've got 7 children, 14 grandchildren, and 15th on the way. And I don't like what I see on the horizon for the next generation of young Americans unless we do something different. We've got the most liberal regime in American history in power, the Obama administration, and the leftists are like termites eating away at our free market system and our traditional American values. Day in and day out, 24 hours a day, 7 hours a day. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And unfortunately, they're making enormous headway in their goal to transform America into a nation in which government is our master, not our servant. I'm reminded of the saying that a government big enough to give you anything you want is powerful enough to take away everything you have. And that's where we are, in my estimation. This is a time for bold leadership, willing to make the tough decisions to allow us to remain free and enjoy the privileges that come from living in the greatest state in the country and the greatest nation in the world. But things have gone terribly wrong in our society. We're on the brink of implementing a disastrous national health care system known as Obamacare, which I believe is going to change our whole way of life in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. It's a job killer for businesses. As I went around the state and as I talked to employers, it's devastating in terms of workers and what's happening to companies as a result of Obamacare. It violates religious freedom. Speaking of the First Amendment, the First Amendment was designed to protect religious freedom, not to separate God from the public square. And there's one more step in the centralization of government power in one of the most critical areas of human life, our individual health care. It needs to go. And it needs to be replaced with a market-driven system that puts power back in the hands of the American consumer and restores the doctor-patient relationship, which should be at the center of a quality health care system. We have a federal government constantly infringing on our constitutional rights, from property rights to the Second Amendment to our religious freedoms and our state sovereignty. Government gets bigger and bigger at the federal and even at the state levels. And unfortunately, the career politicians look the other way as the government bureaucracy exercises more and more power over our lives. And unfortunately, I saw that a bit surprising, even in Texas, going down to Austin and being an outsider, going to Austin and leaving as an outsider, leaving Austin, that I saw even that's happening here in Texas. The counterculture of the 1960s has captured the culture of today, and the Hollywood left has led the way in the coarsening of our culture, resulting in a society in drastic moral decline. You know, I have a chapter in my book called The Coarsening of the Culture, and I have two quotes at the very beginning of that chapter. The first words of the Mayflower Compact, "In the name of God, amen," written as the Pilgrims came to the U.S., and a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who's one of my heroes and I think one of the prophetic voices of the 20th century. And Solzhenitsyn's quote is, "Men have forgotten God." And he tells the story about how when he was a young boy and the Leninists and Communists had taken over in his nation, he asked the village elders, why did all of this happen? And they told him it was because men have forgotten God. And he went through the Gulag, and he was not a religious believer before he went through the Gulag, but he became a strong Christian. And he wrote about what life was truly like under communism, and then he studied the history of communism, and he said 50 years later I came to the conclusion there was no better explanation as to what went wrong with my nation than the men had forgotten God. But then he came to the West. He came to the U.S. He was invited to Harvard to speak and give a commencement address. He never was invited back. But he said, you too are forgetting God, and you're going to pay a heavy price. And then he was invited to London, where he was awarded the Templeton Prize, and he made the same case. And those of you in and out of Europe, what once was the bastion of Christian civilization, post-Christian culture, he too warned the West. And we're seeing it again as the termites eat away at our traditional moral values. But even in Texas, our foundations are not as strong as they once were. There are great things happening in our state, the largest job creation in the private sector of any state in the nation. We have an incredible energy boom. Over 40% of the wells drilled in the U.S. last year were drilled here in Texas. We have so many good things happening here, no state income tax, an entrepreneurial can-do spirit here in Texas. But I would suggest a combination of bad decisions being made in Austin over the past few years and an unwillingness to make the hard and tough decisions required of real conservative leaders has resulted even here in Texas in the very pillars of our way of life being weak. I would suggest to you if the foundation is not strong, Texas will not be able to weather the national storms that I believe will be coming our way in the next few years. We've got to correct the foundational problems of our state while remaining vigilant in the face of an increasingly oppressive liberal regime. We once had an educational system here in Texas which provided our young students a solid foundation in the basics, got students interested in going on to college, prepared for that advanced study, and recognized the importance and value of vocational education for those students seeking a career after high school. We as conservatives historically believed in local control of education. When I was in the Reagan administration, in fact, we tried to get rid of the Department of Education, bring the power back to the states and local communities. We didn't succeed. But the sad thing is, the post-Reagan period, Republican and Democratic administrations, they moved in the opposite direction. More state control over education, taking away local control. More federal control, first with the No Child Left Behind legislation, and then more recently with what the Obama administration has done with Common Core. We've got to take that fight. We've got to move back to local control of education. And interestingly enough, we began it here in Texas. I don't know if you realize it or not, but our education policy for a couple of decades now, we began when Ann Richards was governor, but he continues to have influence even under Republican governors, is a guy named Sandy Crest. Sandy Crest is a former Dallas County Democratic chairman, a liberal Democrat. He's also the architect of No Child Left Behind. But he put an education policy in place where you've got first the TOS test, the TOTS test, the STAR test, a top-down system, pushing everybody to go to a four-year university, neglecting almost denigrating the value of vocational education. And when I was asked to come back into government and chair of the Texas Workforce Commission, as I went around the state of Texas, I kept hearing employers telling me the same thing over and over again. Tom, we've got a shortage of skilled workers. And we're choking off the pipeline of workers because we've got this crazy educational system which is focused on pushing everybody to go to the university and neglecting vocational education. They call it 4x4, they call it teaching to the test, whatever you want to call it. It's a one-size-fits-all approach to education. As a parent of 7 children, I know how different kids are. Some are suited for it, some are interested in it, others are different. I had a young son, very bright kid, for whatever reason he hated school, thanks to my wife. She homeschooled him through high school. He didn't much care for school, but he loved automobiles. And went to college for a while, decided he didn't like that, but now is in auto finance and doing very well, taking his knowledge, technical knowledge, and got in automobiles when he was young, putting it to his advantage. And he's making more money than my daughter, my oldest daughter, who's a PhD, who's teaching in Rockville High School. So college is not necessarily a ticket for success for everybody. But the point is, you've got to understand that the kids learn differently, have different talents. And a lot of kids wound up being throwaways and wind up dropping out of school. We as conservatives believe in a hand up, not a handout. And yet here we were neglecting vocational education. As I mentioned before, we have a real shortage of skilled workers. The average age of a plumber is 56, of a welder 55, stonemason and craftsman 69 years of age. And we can go through other fields, and it's very similar. I was just with a businessman earlier today, and he was saying to me how hard he has to look to find people who are knowledgeable in the skilled trades. And you got to bring work for them. But guess what? We began to do something about it. We put a coalition together. And I was proud to be part of leading that coalition. And we just got passed House Bill 5, which will allow for multiple pathways to a high school degree, more local return to local control of education, and more opportunities for vocational and technical education. And guess what? We defeated Sandy Crest. And by the way, not only was the architect of the previous legislation, which we began to whittle away at, but he also is the lobbyist for Pearson and Company, a British company which has a $450 million teaching to the test contract here in Texas. And that gets to the other issue, the problem of crony capitalism, which is on both sides of the aisle that we have got to address. There's too much power of the Austin insiders, the big money interests, the lobbyists, who are not really listening to or care about the folks out there who are feeling the effects of an educational system that doesn't work. So we did something about it, and I will continue to take that fight for local control as governor, and also more opportunities for vocational and technical education, critical to our economy and private sector job creation and continued growth. But secondly, another issue that surprised me and disappointed me. I led the fight when Ann Richards tried to put in to a constitutional amendment what's called the Robin Hood School Finance Scheme. I'm against it in principle because we're talking about taking local property taxes, which I think should stay local, and redistributing them elsewhere, the so-called property-rich districts to the property-poor districts. It's sort of like the way to raise people from property-poor districts up is to bring down the so-called property-rich districts. Today, it amounts to $1.1 billion taken from 374 districts. Plano is one of the ones that you see your money shipped elsewhere. No accountability, no local control. It's a bad system. We defeated it. I led the effort. We defeated it 2-1 when she tried to put it in constitutionally. She got it in legislatively. 2 governors later, it's still there. My opponent, Greg Abbott, defends it as legal and constitutional. We have something in our state constitution that says you can't have a statewide property tax. That's what this is, and it needs to go. And as governor, I'll lead an effort to put a coalition together to get rid of it. There's a better way to fund property-poor districts than taking local school property taxes and shipping them elsewhere. And again, it's part of that overall issue of returning local control over education to the local citizen. And you can wage your fights here in terms of dealing with issues, but it doesn't work if your money is being shipped elsewhere, and that's what's happening. You know, what surprised me coming again back into office is some of this, again, I'm dating myself a little bit. I remember a time when we had a toll road between Dallas and Fort Worth. And once you paid it off, it became a free road. Now you've got free roads are turning into toll roads, and we're subsidizing private interests, including foreign interests, on their deals. It's not anything different from bailing out the too big to fail financial institutions, which I was against when it was done in the Clinton administration by Robert Rubin or in the Bush administration by Henry Paulson. It's called socialization of the risk, privatization of the gain. If the deal works out, they get the profits. If it doesn't, you put it on to the American taxpayers. I hate to tell you, but it's going on in Texas with this transportation deal. If you've been down on the toll road, SH 130, it goes from Georgetown to Seguin. I'm not quite sure why it goes in that direction. You can go very fast on that road. There isn't a lot of traffic. And Moody's just put a warning about the indebtedness on that. And guess what? We, the taxpayers, are on the hook for $400 million if it goes busted. That stuff needs to end. And it's wrong, whether it's done by Republicans or Democrats, and it's not appropriate that our Attorney General would simply rubber stamp that and go along. As governor, I'll lead an effort to do what Ken Paxton and Senator Nichols tried to do, make sure that transportation dollars are dedicated to transportation. We once had the best transportation system in the nation, and we can have it again. But don't divert the money away from transportation infrastructure like it's currently done. Move back towards a pay-as-you-go system and begin to address the debt levels of our transportation. We have the highest debt levels. You say you're not raising taxes. Debt is not equity, as I learned a long time ago in the venture capital business. We got $13 billion in principal debt. You add interest, it's over $30 billion. We've got to get this situation under control, move towards a pay-as-you-go system and no more subsidizing these private interests. If they want to build a private toll road, fine, but they got to be on the hook if it doesn't work out, not dumping on the Texas taxpayer. That's some of the stuff that's going on. Again, I mentioned having been in the venture capital business, it's hard enough in the private sector to be successful. I worked with one of the most brilliant guys in the country in that business in the Dallas area. I know how things can go awry, whether you're running your own business or investing in business. The public should not be involved in it. Obama has done it with Solondra, picking winners and losers. We're involved in it. They call it the Emerging Technology Fund. It's a public venture capital fund using taxpayer dollars. That's $50 million. And they're picking winners and losers. And guess what? The rate of return for investors, I don't think, is all that good. They're not really willing to release the fee. I will, as governor, from day one, eliminate the Emerging Technology Fund. And I'll apply that $50 million to border security. I have no confidence in it. We have so much talent around the state, retired military and civilian people, that I think are willing to come in and help design an effective program. I was talking about being in Palestine, Texas, not too long ago, speaking to a Tea Party group, and a guy who kind of got my attention. He had his Vietnam veteran hat on, and I'm a Vietnam veteran myself, and we got to talking. And it was amazing, the talent that is out there. Here's a guy that was in the military, speaks 3 dialects of Arabic, but he was involved in Marine border security and perimeter security of all of the embassies as a Marine. This is a man who understands perimeter security and border security. But the point is, there's so much talent out there, military, retired military, civilian people, technological advances that are there that we can utilize, and it's not that costly, but you got to have the will to do it. My opponent's been Attorney General for 10 years. He's done 0 on border security. It's easier to sort of not rock the boat, to get out and, I had a retired general tell me he was down there with a state official. They did a soundbite down at the border. Boy, we got to get tough on border security. They go back to Austin, and this Army National Guard general, he's got a plan, a strategy to implement border security in our state. And guess what? There wasn't much interest after the soundbite. That stuff has got to change. And that's what disillusioned me being in Austin. The rhetoric is great, but the reality is very different. And we have a situation in which, I don't know how familiar you are with this cancer fund, but here you got $3 billion and we're giving out $300 million a year, a lot of it in so-called commercialization grants. It's the old question of follow the money. But here you have a group of people who were appointed to the board, including Greg Abbott. He was put on the audit committee. He was put on as a watchdog of this cancer committee. And for 3 years, he never attended a meeting. And they're giving out $300 million a year. Now this is, I've been on a number, and I still am on a number of private and public boards and nonprofit boards. You've got a fiduciary responsibility. Not only did he not attend one of any of the meetings, he turns around and gets $4 million in contributions from folks that benefited from this fund. This is not conservatism, it's crony capitalism. And we've got to break the cycle of the Austin insiders and the big money folks who are dominating, the system. And how are you going to lead this nation back in the right direction? Texas has got to do it. And we're not going to do it if people are more focused on moving up the ladder or what do you have to do to get those $100,000 checks, as opposed to listening to people out there who are concerned about the state, concerned about the country, and want to get some things done. And this is what troubles me, because there's too much of this, what passes for conservatism, and it isn't conservatism. And if you will, as I said, I think that we have an incredible opportunity to get this country turned around. And we complain all day about the failed leadership of our policymakers, Democrats and Republicans alike. And we can bemoan the fact that we have the most liberal regime in American history. But that does not help fix the mess the country's in. And, it's a little issue, it seems like, to maybe the Greg Abbott, but to me it's a big issue. You had a situation the other day. I've been in the private sector. American Airlines and USA are merging. Now, that's a very difficult business to make a profit in. There have been a lot of bankrupt airlines, including American, which is just coming out of bankruptcy. But this is a merger that, in my estimation, is powerfully important to North Texas. It is not a monopoly. It's not a duopoly. You've got plenty of competition out there in a very tough, capital-intensive business. Now, my opponent says, look, I wake up every morning and sue Barack Obama, except for the morning he woke up and he decided to join with Eric Holder in suing to block the merger of American Airlines and U.S. Air. Every conservative economic think tank has come out and defended that merger as something it makes economic sense. It is an example of big government republicanism, not free market economics. So this really is a battle, if you will, I would suggest, from a top-down approach to a grassroots free market approach from the grassroots up. And what we have got to do is recognize that the problems we face, they permeate every aspect of our society, and the decisions that we make going forward affect the kind of future our kids are going to have. I see the left as they're coming into the state, and I butted heads with the Alinsky crowd. When I was in the Reagan administration, we defunded the left. I inherited an agency when I was in Vietnam. A guy named Sam Brown ran the agency before Sam Brown was supporting the other side in that war. I walked into an agency. In fact, I see you've got Mark Levin's book. I hired Mark, brought him to Washington. Actually, he was the young attorney at Texas Instruments at the time. But we defunded the left. They were getting about $20 million. And again, like termites eating away at our foundation. And we ended that. But you have to have the courage to stand up to it. And guess what? In San Antonio, Texas, Chicago was the base of their operations, which ultimately trained Barack Obama. San Antonio was their southwestern hub. And that same crowd today is the group behind the Castro brothers and what they had just done in San Antonio. We used to call it the People's Republic of Austin. Now you can call it the People's Republic of San Antonio. Hard left people that have taken over, because unfortunately our Republicans do not pay attention to what is going on. They don't bother to read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. They don't bother to understand the strategy of the left and how to take them on effectively and begin to put them on the defensive. And we defunded the left, and when I was in the Reagan administration, went to the Rio Grande Valley where they were trying to take over the valley politically that year. And we put a coalition together, a broad cross-section, because by and large the Hispanic community down there was pro-life, pro-family, strong work ethic, neighbor helping neighbor. And we put a coalition together, and guess what? Ronald Reagan carried the valley. We had strong veteran and military support as well. We have got to take the fight to the left. Do not underestimate the seriousness of the challenge we face in this state. And we're not going to succeed if we just continue business as usual and sort of think everything is going to be great because it's been good for a period of time, and it has been good for us politically. But it was a hard fight when many of us were trying to turn Texas in the mid-90s from a minority Republican state into a majority state. And at that time we were lucky because some of the Democrats in charge, including my counterpart at the Democratic Party at the time, Bill White, who later ran for governor, were asleep at the switch, and we took advantage of it. Don't think that they can't do the same to us if we don't get serious. I would suggest to you in closing that we're in a battle for the soul of the nation. And the next conservative revolution is not going to come from Washington insiders. It's not going to come from career politicians, people that see that they're indispensable and don't believe in term limits or don't believe in doing a job and going home. It's not going to come from Austin insiders. It's going to come from grassroots Texans and Americans across the nation. If we get our act together, we rebuild our foundation, and we begin providing, once again, the kind of principled conservative leadership which we can, then I think Texas will lead this nation back in the right direction. I ask for your consideration, support, personally and financially, in my campaign to be the next governor of Texas, and I assure you, I'm not going to change once I get there. I've been in the fight a long time, and it's important. We stand up for our principles. We do what's right for the good of our children and our grandchildren, and for the good of Texas and America. Thank you.
Our Medicaid policy in Texas is now being dictated to us by the Obama administration. That's already happening to us. And as a result, I mean, what that did for the state legislature is they effectively pushed down the cost of Medicaid to your local government. And for those of us who resist that, now there's talk about requiring us to set aside a certain amount of our budget to go back to Austin to be distributed much the same way schools.
Another Robin Hood.
Another Robin Hood program.
Okay,
and the problem is all the infrastructure is now getting changed to work on this type of program. And how do you unwind all of that?
Here's what now. Distinguish between, I know what you're talking about. That's not what I was talking about on the Medicaid waiver. What I was talking about is getting a waiver from the federal government.
Here's what we have. We have 1115 waiver.
No, I'm talking about the state. The state did not apply for a waiver.
It did. And it was adopted.
No.
We're operating under it currently.
No. What that means, what a waiver under Medicaid means is you get the money from the feds for it, that you are entitled in the state of Texas to allocate those resources as you see fit. Rhode Island got that waiver. Texas did not. Texas should have tried to get it. It's not what you're talking. You're talking about something different. It's not the same. And I understand the problem.
We have the same waiver that California has.
No, but it's not. It is not a waiver which allows the state of Texas.
Exactly. It does not allow us to use it in the way that we see fit. It's being dictated.
That's by the Obama administration. And what I'm saying, what I've advocated, what should have been done when we had a Republican in the White House, get a waiver then, which wasn't done. Rhode Island got one, we didn't. But we should have had legislation passed this session which says we'll take the money that we're entitled to, because it's our money that's gone up there, but we'll determine how to spend it in Texas. We did not pass that legislation this time. Only today has Rick Perry come out, I saw it in the Texas Tribune, calling on doing it. Where you get, the horses are out of the barn. And you got all these problems at the county level. I visited with your county judge about some of these problems. I understand it, but I'm saying that I think there's a case for calling a special session and getting it done quickly. Because I think we've got a good challenge. It might take a while. But no, it's a huge problem. And the governor's got to come in and get everybody together. What do we do with this god-awful mess? You know there's a train wreck coming, you're already feeling the effects of it. How do we best do it without losing our state sovereignty? Yes.
Would you support open carry in Texas?
Yes.
On the Medicare-Medicaid issue, so much of that ends up in state hands. And there is no question, there is a huge amount of fraud and abuse. An example which came up locally and stuff like this, overly much, but is that in terms of orthodontics, medically necessary orthodontics, over half of all the ones in the nation are done in state Texas. I don't think our kids' teeth are that much worse than any other states. The problem is that we end up talking about this and it never gets addressed because there are people like the TMA and other medical outfits that are made very nervous about discussion of fraud because they know there is enough out there that a lot of their members are going to get dinged. So how do we go about actually because we're talking budgetary amounts of tens of billions of dollars that could be recovered or essentially not spent.
Well, and you also have it food stamps as well.
Well, yeah.
We cannot control the food stamps, the bartering.
Yeah, that we can't, but we have some control of Medicare.
No, but we can, on Medicare and Medicaid, you're absolutely right. And it's federal funds, but just because it's federal funds, we should address it here in Texas. There needs to
We
be
do a minute.
a major fraud, anti-fraud prevention unit put in place. Also, the technology's out there. You can see certain things. You can identify things early on. And again, that is an important area that we've neglected, that has been neglected in the state. The problem is it's not a policy-driven operation in Austin. It's sort of like, don't rock the boat and just sort of let things go on because you start rocking the boat and that creates issues and controversy and we don't want that. But you got to rock the boat. And I will address that issue. Yes.
You mentioned the 10th Amendment, and I'm sure as governor of Texas, that'll be your favorite part of the U.S. Constitution. Given, for obvious reasons, because that reserves to the state all rights not enumerated to the federal government. Given that our federal government is trotting on our rights, the Second Amendment rights, and the Fourth and the Fifth, would you be supportive of state legislation that stands up to unconstitutional federal laws?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you have to, the Second Amendment is a clear example. I think a number of states have addressed that issue, Missouri most recently. And there are 10th Amendment issues out there. There are ways you can, address that issue. Again, you want to proceed appropriately, but I'm fortunate to have a professor at Georgetown University, just died about a month ago, the late George Carey, and his Bible was the Federalist Papers of the American Constitution. And George is, as you say, he was a great believer of separation of powers, checks and balances, and the principle of federalism, which is the forgotten amendment, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, power of none, expressly delegated to the federal government, resorted to the states and the people respectively. We also have to look at, we were talking a little bit earlier about what happened to some of the Tea Party people in Houston. Is there an opportunity or a situation where you might have an ombudsman if the federal government overreaches? You've got small businesses or individuals that are treated inappropriately by an oppressive federal government. Should you provide some legal representation for them? You've got to pick and choose the right cases at the beginning, but again, that's something proactively we can do. I was with a lawyer the other day who had a case that almost got to the Supreme Court on the constitutionality of the Endangered Species Act. And you've just got to, there are talented people out there, you've just got to be proactive rather than, get up. It's easy to have a press conference and say, this is, get your breast, this is what I'm doing. It's how you stay, you've got to beat the left, you've got to stay a step ahead of them. You've got to outsmart them, outwork them. And we're not doing that.
One other quick question.
Last question.
I wanted to second what you said because my wife is Mexican American. She's Latina. And she's ultra conservative. And she gets disgusted when she hears liberal Anglos tell her, you know, like the Bryant, whatever, Ross, or whatever his name is, these anchors on NBC and all that, tell her as a Latina what she thinks, that she's for is flooding the country's wide open voice, so
No.
she feels like your wife.
No.
But I was going to ask, is there a way of building a coalition among like-minded states, you know, to help out Ted Cruz and say, you know, we agree with this Obamacare thing is a disaster. We are not going to send another penny to Washington, D.C. until this thing gets emasculated or whatever, and have 15 or 20 states, because Texas is a donor state, right? I mean, we send more money to Washington than we ever get back. Is there a way you can do that and just withhold money from Washington, D.C. and say, this is going to have to occur?
The state doesn't control that. I mean, that's control on the, the taxes. I mean, that's done in, you'd have to look at it, but I don't think that.
Yes,
General Iron.
I guess the point about cooperating with other states, the compact seems to be underutilized by the states with common interests. I just don't know why that happens. It used to be used a lot less in the universities for the tuition stuff, but they don't seem to be using the compact, the state compact as much as they once did. That's one of the things.
Well, that's a good point. The other issue, we have a huge water problem in Texas, an incredible problem. I worry about the politicalization of the new water board and centralization of power. 2 of the 3 people appointed by the governor have no experience in water. But why can't you, for example, Oklahoma and Louisiana, both neighboring states, Republican governors, they have an abundance of water, we've got a shortage of water. Isn't there a compact or a deal that could be made with them? It could be a win-win situation. For whatever reason, we haven't explored, we should explore. And there are a whole bunch of other areas where compacts could be put in place with like-minded people. And you've got Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico now, Republican government. There are a number of areas where we can work together. All right, thank you very much.